one director, 6 films, 2 podcasters. This episode, we're celebrating Star Wars Day and Lucasfilm's 50th anniversary with the Lucas List, our ranking of the 6 films directed by George Lucas.
You've taken your first step into a larger world. Let's go.
Hello there. I'm Rowan Williams.
I'm Baz McAllister.
And welcome to Force Material, where this week we're doing something a little different for May 4. I don't think we've done a ranking things episode of the show before, Baz. I don't think we've ever tried to do a countdown like this before.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we haven't. So this is exciting.
Yeah,
we can get in some real fisticuffs over this.
So yeah, this should be fun.
Virtually.
Virtual fisticuffs, exactly. So what we're going to do, guys, is we're going to rank the films of George Lucas. Now, we've got to put some constraints on this because otherwise we'd be here all night. So we're only ranking the films that he directed, not the various things that he, produced or wrote or had some sort of hand in. It's not a competitive draft kind of scenario. At the end of the night, we will have 2 separate lists. We're not trying to sort of combine them into one mega list. Any other rules you can think of that we should state up front, Baz?
We have actually also compiled a list of what we think the other one is going to go with, which we will reveal at the end.
Yes. So that'll be fun. And how this is going to work is we will reveal our picks. Obviously, start from the bottom, start from number 6, work our way up to number 1, because there's only 6 films directed by George Lucas. Once a film appears on both of our lists, then we'll talk about it. If we pick different things at number 6, we'll have to wait until those movies show up on both of our lists for us to stop and talk about, why we ranked them, where we ranked them. But anyway, that stuff will become very clear as we move through the list. You guys don't need to worry about that. Baz, let's just do this. Let's get straight into this.
Get right into it.
Tell me, Baz, what is your 6th favorite George Lucas film?
Potentially controversial choice.
Excellent.
THX 1138.
No! Are you joking?
Yes. No, I'm not joking. I'm not joking. Let's kick this off with a fight.
Look. Well, I mean, no spoilers, but I'm not going to be getting a perfect 6 from 6 on my guesses at the end of this. Wow, at number 6, take me through the thinking here.
Oh no, we haven't both mentioned it, so we may not be talking about this for quite some time. So you're going to spend the next hour just quietly hating me, and then we can talk about why. So. What did you pick as number 6 on your list?
Number 6 on my list is Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. Probably no shock to anyone who's ever listened to the podcast before. But we will talk about it when we get there. Baz, what is number 5 on your list?
I think we're about to talk about it. Number 5 on my list is Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones.
Okay. And why has this come in at number 5 on your list?
Well, it's simply because it's the weakest of the prequels, and it therefore comes at the bottom of the little trilogy of prequels that is in George Lucas's canon here. Mm-hmm. That's not to say I dislike it. Over the years, I've come to mellow on Episode 2. I think when I first saw it, it was the only one that I saw that didn't give me that Star Wars blindness. Do you know what I mean? Like when you come out of the cinema after seeing a Star Wars film for the first time, you're blown away. You think it's better than it actually was. And I remember watching Attack of the Clones and thinking, I don't know about that. And that was the first time I had a little Star Wars wobble. The next time was fairly recently, but that's a story for another time. But I've got to sort of back this up by saying that it's got some great moments in it. It's got, the Geonosis Serena battle, obviously, which is the first time I think we get to see legions of Jedi with sabers doing what Jedi are supposed to do, supported by clones doing what they're supposed to do, and the cool gunships, and all that stuff's great. We have Boba Fett versus Obi-Wan, or Jango Fett, versus Obi-Wan. We have the Slave One asteroid field chase with the excellent sound design choices. There's a lot of great stuff in this film that I love, but it's definitely the weakest of the three narratively. It just doesn't hang together well. All the Anakin Padme scenes I would love to see on the cutting room floor. I just hated every single one of them. So that's kind of how I feel about episode 2. And it had the feel of, in the way that Empire Strikes Back is a tradition, as a transitional film. It's like it's the bridging the gap between A New Hope and Return of the Jedi in an excellent way. This bridges the gap between the other two films in this trilogy, but just utterly kind of fails to grab you, or in my view, sort of move things along or do anything significant. Like the Clone Wars begin, sure, but everything else in this film just feels a bit fillery.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. This was the first one that when I saw it in theaters, I wasn't immediately blown away by it. This was the first time I kind of realized, like, oh, Star Wars is, it's fallible. It's not always going to be my thing. I'd seen Phantom Menace in '99, and we'll talk about Phantom Menace, but I was definitely one of the people who came away from that first time with rose-colored glasses on, didn't want to hear any criticisms. Attack of the Clones, as I was watching it, I was just like, oh no, what's gone wrong with this? And I remember just, leaving the theater and sort of going like, what happened? Like what? And here's the thing. Attack of the Clones is my least favorite George Lucas movie. That's why it was number 6 on my list. It's my least favorite Star Wars movie if we were to rank the Star Wars movies. But and this is sort of crucial, I think, for this to sort of set the parameters of this list. I'd still rather watch it than 90% of all the other movies ever made. It's still a Star Wars movie. It's still a George Lucas movie. There's still a lot of stuff in here that I love. You listed a lot of it. I feel like there's a lot of stuff in here that is universally agreed upon as being great, even if the overall film isn't to everybody's taste. So you talked about Jango Fett versus Obi-Wan. That's great. Everybody talks about the depth charge in the Jango Fett Obi-Wan asteroid chase, and it's because it's incredible. I love the chase on Coruscant at the start of the movie. I mean, story-wise, I don't understand it at all. There's no logic to why Django would need to hire another bounty hunter to do his job, but that's not the point.
Yeah.
The chase itself is really fun. Seeing Coruscant that way was great. Bringing, those kind of Blade Runner vibes into a Star Wars movie, was fantastic.
Elan Sleaze-Bagano and his death.
Evan Sleaze-Bagano, exactly.
Yeah.
Damien from Home and Away for any 90s Australian listeners. And the prequels would have these scenes. They'd have these moments where you'd think, this is it. George is back. Like, we're back to original trilogy or even better levels of hype. And then you'd watch the rest of the movie and you'd be like, oh, okay, we're not. But the thing is, as the kind of the years go by and the weight of expectations that was on those movies falls away, a lot of those criticisms fall by the wayside as well. Like, a lot of the things that I held against the movie when I first saw it don't seem that important now. And maybe this is just Stockholm syndrome from having watched it as part of Star Wars rewatches so many times over the years, but I still really enjoy the things that I enjoy about this movie, and the stuff that I don't enjoy about this movie, just this kind of water off a duck's back. I agree with you. The romance is awful, but it's irredeemable. I can't get on board with the movement in recent years to kind of redeem it and talk about it as if it's actually this great romance and misunderstood and so on and so forth. It's bad. and this is not really the movie's fault or George's fault, but Attack of the Clones began my kind of love-hate relationship with Australia's influence on the Star Wars prequels. It's cool that there were 2 Star Wars movies made in Sydney, but there's also just a bit of cultural cringe when you hear those like Australian and New Zealand accents and see all those soap opera actors in a Star Wars movie. But yeah, this is the thing. Overall, there's still probably a lot more that I like about this movie than there is that I don't like. But the plot of this movie, especially, the first few times I watched it, is baffling. I had no idea what was going on in this movie. All the stuff with Obi-Wan's chase, Obi-Wan's quest to find out what's going on with the clones and so on and so forth. I mean, it's interesting, and it's stuff that I've grown to like on repeated viewings over the years is, Obi-Wan's kind of private eye adventure. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that first time seeing it at the cinemas, it just felt interminable. It was like, what are we doing here? Like, when is this going to end? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Why? What's the deal with these clones? Why are the Jedi not asking any questions about the clones? And, and so on and so forth. I just had a lot of questions.
You just lull yourself into thinking, oh, well, this Sifo Dyas mystery seems to be quite an important part of everything. I guess, it wasn't tied up in this film. I guess it'll be tied up in the next film. And it kind of wasn't. So, it's just things like that do baffle you, the choices that George made. And I still don't like the choice of having Yoda be this little ball of energy with a lightsaber when he's in the middle of a fight. It looks ridiculous and isn't dignified. And I just never thought that if Yoda had a lightsaber, that would be the way he would fight.
No.
So that just, I really don't like that duel. It's probably my least favorite lightsaber duel in every Star Wars film ever, probably.
I would agree. There's a moment when he first sort of pulls back his robe and pulls out the lightsaber. That was cool. And I remember being excited by that when I saw that, in the cinema for the first time. But everything that followed after that just didn't really do anything for me. All the jumping around, it's just like, all right, he's a cartoon character now. Yeah.
And also a benefits fraudster pretending to be disabled.
He's Charlie Bucket's granddad or whatever at this point. Yeah. At this point of the movie. But as I said, it's not a war crime. Maybe that's probably not a pull quote for the poster, but it's fine. Like I would happily go home and put it on and watch it right now. And if that's the worst film you've ever directed, if that's the worst film on the list, that's pretty good.
But it's not the worst film on my list. So, and I'll tell you, like, this is a teaser to our upcoming conversation, which is probably going to be uncomfortable for me. But I just thought to myself when we were making this list, I haven't seen THX for many, many years. Shall I watch it? And then I realized, I'd rather just watch Attack of the Clones again. And when I realized that,
but that's your answer, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Anyway, so what was your number 5?
Number 5 on my list is Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. What was number 4 on your list?
I guess we're talking about Revenge of the Sith. So we're gonna just pop up this list like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's number 4 on my list.
Yeah. And what earned it the number 4 spot for you?
Well, it's the second weakest of the prequel trilogy. I remember being unreasonably pumped up about this when I came out of the cinema after having seen it. After episode 2, I'm thinking, yes, Star Wars is back. George is back, and I deluded myself about that for a little while. And then I got really down on it for many years. And then, rewatching it fairly recently, I got kind of up on it again because it's actually pretty good. It hangs together really well. Mm-hmm. It's got one of the best openings of any Star Wars film, I think. With that space battle, just straight into the action above Coruscant, the last battle of the war,
100%,
and the rescue of the Chancellor. It's all just straight up action with R2-D2 getting his little moments of glory, and it's I loved all that stuff, and it just shows you that relationship between Anakin and Obi-Wan as it should have been, and as it sort of has become most beloved in terms of the relationship in the Clone Wars cartoons.
Yeah.
So that was just a slam bang 20-minute opening, which just puts you in the right headspace for this. And then you're straight into the rest of it, and it continues at this kind of breakneck speed, with a lot of brilliant stuff in it. A lot of the fall of Anakin stuff is really good, where Sidious is just sort of whispering in his ear and trying to gradually convince him to come over, and the way that all happens is masterfully done. The Yoda fight in this one marginally better than the Yoda fight in the previous one, but still not fantastic. The final battle on Geonosis is great between Anakin and Obi-Wan. Love that. Still think this film could have gone there in terms of a love triangle vibe. Nearly did, but could have. And I think that had it gone there, that would have been really intriguing and something that shows Obi-Wan as a bit of a flawed character, succumbing to that Jedi should not have any attachments, kind of throwing that all out the window to hook up with his best friend's girl and give Anakin a real reason to fall rather than the delusion that he was being cheated on or being betrayed. So I do feel it loses points for that, because I would have liked to have seen it go there. But there's a lot of great stuff in this film to love. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that opening space battle, as you said, is incredible. That is some of my favorite stuff in all of Star Wars. Definitely one of the best openings to any of the films. I think George, for years and years and years, talked about the tragedy of Darth Vader and the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker, and the fact that he wanted to go back and do the prequels and make the tragedy clearer. And I think Episode 3 really nails the tragedy of it all. I think you have to give it to him, like in the sense that this is a movie where you get all these moments where you see things that could go the other way, like all these moments where just for a split second. What if Mace Windu did beat the Emperor here? What if Yoda beat the Emperor? What if Anakin doesn't, agree to? But that the tragedies, where it's headed the entire time.
Yeah.
We're inevitably headed to to Darth Vader and to the status quo of Episode 4. The bubble opera is undefeated. It's still incredible stuff, and a lot of that is probably most likely Squid Lake, exactly. A lot of that is most likely due to Tom Stoppard, who worked as a script doctor on this one. But credit to George for getting him involved, and then I think it's a really well directed scene. Order 66. That entire sequence is fantastic. General Grievous, I know a lot of people don't like him. I think General Grievous is a really fun villain. I like him as like a prototype, like a rough. We're heading in the direction of Darth Vader. We're creating these mechanical men. It's all. You take, a dash of Maul, a dash of Dooku, a dash of Grievous, and you get Vader essentially. So, I like that element. I'm not someone who sort of thinks they should have just kept the same henchman through all the three movies. I kind of liked seeing, different aspects of Vader explored through the henchmen.
Yeah.
I think the fall to the dark side is probably a little too quick for my liking. Given that, this was the culmination of not just these prequel films, but really, from George's perspective, 30 years of storytelling. It just feels like he really goes from O to woe.
Yeah.
But, by the time he's like killing younglings and stuff, you're like, okay, this feels like he's fallen a little too quickly. But I suppose, the dark side is one of those in for a penny, in for a pound kind of things where it's like, once you go dark,
you never go back.
You go back, yeah. And I suppose you could point to Episode 2 with the Tusken Raiders and so on. Like, it's not like it came out of nowhere. There'd always been this darker
That's true, yeah.
side to his personality.
Yeah. And then as we discover in the cartoons, Palpatine has been needling away at Anakin for years and just kind of prodding and testing him and pushing him further into bad decisions.
That's the thing, right? Is like it's hard to differentiate this movie in some ways from the Clone Wars and to remember what I thought of it before the Clone Wars, because that so colors my perception of these movies now, especially the the victory and death, like the final arc of the Clone Wars. Like that almost bumped this higher up the list for me, just the way that this movie, the way they tied in that arc so perfectly with this film. But ultimately you've got to just judge the film on its own merits, and so for me it's sitting pretty at number 5. I like that he basically tied up all the loose ends that he wanted to tie up in this one, but I think that also caused some problems where, towards the end of the film, it feels like he's definitely just in a rush. And some of these things, he's tying up things that don't need to be tied up. He's actually raising more questions as a result. So, like we'll see C-3PO and R2-D2 on the same ship for 20 years. Like, why did the Death Star take 20 years to build, etc.? Like, there's some odd stuff in the final couple of minutes of the movie, but that's more kind of nitpicking. It's not really, a reflection on him as a director. I mean, how do you feel about the duel on Mustafar?
I like it more now than I used to, I think. It's not one of my favorite, but I think that it gets robbed of a little bit of dignity by them whipping around on top of the lava on the little platforms. Yeah, don't love that. That feels a bit like a video game. But battering each other up and down the gantries and everything just feels a lot like that. The big duels between Luke and Vader and Empire and Jedi. It's good. It's got a lot of nice parallels to those.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's parts of that duel that I really like, and then I'm with you on, I prefer the simpler, two masters who don't need to be jumping around and doing a million moves a minute to show how great they are, sort of lightsaber duels. So, yeah, it's not my favorite. I definitely think in terms of the performances, I think he got more out of, Hayden Christensen and Natalie Portman in this movie than he did in episode 2. The romance aspect of it feels, it's a doomed romance, but that aspect of it feels truer to me here than it did in episode 2. There's a scene that in this movie that for me is up there with like anything that George directed, which is, just the scene of like Anakin looking over the city and sort of weighing up in his mind like what he should do. There's a real atmosphere to that. Yeah, there's an artfulness to that scene that is sort of missing in some other parts of the prequels that I really enjoyed. So anyway, that's where I'm at with Revenge of the Sith. My second favorite prequel, I guess, is the best way to put it.
It's kind of an unconventional Star Wars structure to get the biggest battle over with at the very start, really. And the rest of it sort of plays out as more personal battles. So they're like clashes of will that are played out as fights. Yeah. So that's kind of an interesting choice, but it works all right,
Well, because the stakes, the personal stakes are getting higher, right? Like even as you say, the scope of the battles is getting smaller. So yeah, I think that works really well. Baz, what number? So wait, what number was Revenge of the Sith for you? Was that 4?
That was my 4. So I could ask you what your 4 was.
My number 4 is Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. What is your number 3?
Figured it might be. Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace.
If it wasn't for you putting THX on the bottom, I would say we've just been doing this too long, and we've become the one hive mind. But I'm glad there's at least a disagreement there for us to get into. But Phantom Menace. Why is it at the number 3 spot for you?
After having watched the prequels again reasonably recently, I think after I got Disney Plus, I think it hangs together the best of all 3, and it's plain to see now. If you'd asked me a few years ago, when I was younger and more naive, I would have said Revenge of the Sith, sure, it's the best one. But no, I think Phantom Menace is a classic. It's basically A New Hope reskinned in a lot of ways. It's that hero's journey thing. It's got the little kid sort of being ripped away from his family and taken off into this adventure. It's got the mentors and the droids and and it's got hands down probably the best sequence in the entire prequels, the pod race, which, completely irresponsible of anyone to put that child into that racer. But,
the cool thing about that as well is like when you said hands down the best sequence in the prequels, I thought you were going to say the Duel of the Fates. So the fact that there's two sequences in that movie, that's the two best sequences is cool.
Yeah, very close behind. That's one of the top lightsaber duels in the in the Star Wars canon. And this film has my favorite prequel character in it, Qui-Gon Jinn, played by inimitable Liam Neeson, who comes from Ballymena, which is 30 miles down the road from where I grew up. Just basking in a bit of reflected glory there. But yeah, I think Neeson turns in a fantastic performance as Qui-Gon, and the more we learn about Qui-Gon through expanded universe stuff and other mediums, the more I love him. I just think he's a great character.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, again, my thoughts are fairly similar to yours. Phantom Menace has absolutely worked its way up my Star Wars list and my Lucas list. Over the last few years, it has had this revival of this resuscitation and of its reputation, and I think it's completely deserved. I think it's the best looking of all the prequels by a country mile. Not even close. And that's probably because of, and I know people say this all the time, but that's probably because of how much of it was practical. Because it's like as innovative and groundbreaking as episode 2 and 3 were, a lot of that stuff I don't think has aged super well. Whereas episode 1, even though all the talk when it came out was like, it's these incredible, computer generated characters and landscapes and blah, 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 blah. A lot of the movie is still, shot in camera. And there's that famous stat that gets trotted out all the time that it had the most miniature shots of all time and all that sort of stuff. So of the prequels, it feels the most like one of the original trilogy to me. It was shot in film, obviously, whereas episodes 2 and 3 are digital. Although we probably should have talked about that in relation to episode 2. I mean, say what you will about the merits of the film itself, but it's an extremely influential film in terms of being the movie that sort of made all the exhibitors make the switch to digital. So that's doesn't make me like the movie anymore really as a movie, but it's worth noting. Again, like we talked about with episode 2, a lot of the criticisms of Phantom Menace have fallen by the wayside over the years for me, and we're kind of just left appreciating the stuff in it that worked. The pod race, as you said, the Duel of the Fates, those are two of the best sequences in George Lucas's entire career. It is impossible as well. Speaking of being able to separate the Clone Wars from Revenge of the Sith, it's impossible for me to separate the pod race from the video game, which was amazing. I think Maul was an incredibly cool villain. I maintain he was much cooler in the Phantom Menace than he ever has been since they brought him back. It's
Peter Serafinowicz doing the voice.
Yeah. And the fact that he barely ever talks. I mean, the coolest thing about Maul is his look, and that's best display. That's best featured in the Phantom Menace. The Phantom Menace.
He does get very chatty Cathy, doesn't he, in the cartoons?
I'm just not a fan of that
compared to.
I know it's been great. Like, and he's had great moments, and he's fantastic in that final arc. But it really did take up until that final arc of the Clone Wars for me to admit, okay, it's probably a good thing they brought Darth Maul back from the dead. But I've always loved him in the Phantom Menace.
I mean, those cartoons have fleshed him out and everything, but they've fundamentally changed him from what he was intended to be. Like, his name is Darth Maul. He's just a weapon. He's a bludgeoning weapon, which Sidious is using against the Jedi. So it's all he was ever meant to be. And he does it really well in this film. And can you remember when the double-bladed lightsaber got ignited for the first time? Lost your mind.
Incredible. Especially because, like, when I was a kid, I was into the, like the Tales of the Jedi comics with Exar Kun and his double-sided lightsaber. So, it was so cool to actually see one of those on screen. The Phantom Menace introduces Darth Sidious's plan. It's really complex. It's there's a lot to dig into there. It's really Sidious's plan is really fascinating, and Phantom Menace kind of introduces that. It's a really smart story that unfolds over the 3 movies, even if maybe some of the things happening around it aren't that smart. Liam Neeson and Ewan McGregor are both perfectly cast. You mentioned the lightsaber combat in the Duel of the Fates. I think this movie has some of maybe the best lightsaber combat in the saga. I mean, because even in the Duel of the Fates, like, they're not at the point that they would reach in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, where it goes into video game territory. Like, it's much more choreographed than anything we saw in the original trilogy, but it still feels more or less of a piece with what we saw there. It's like, okay, well, I could believe that 30 years ago, this is how they did it.
Yeah, I remember when we talked to Benton Dew, who storyboarded a lot of that fight, and him talking about his obvious martial arts influences, and especially from Hong Kong cinema, etc. So yeah, it's that's a good episode, by the way. If you haven't listened to that one, go back and check it out. But yeah, fascinating stuff. As far as I'm concerned, like, people who have a problem with episode 1 tend to have one of 3 problems. 1, the title, Phantom Menace. 2, Jar Jar Binks. 3, Anakin Skywalker. And watching it back, like, all those things are they're fine. They're fine. They're all right. They're not, I remember when that Phantom edit was going around, basically all it did was cut out most of Jar Jar's scenes and minimize Anakin a bit, and that's clearly what people had a problem with. And even changed the title technically. So yeah, like, if you have a problem with this film, it's probably one of those 3 things that's needling you somehow, and you just need to let that go. It's fine. Like, the Phantom Menace is a Buck Rogers pulpy Saturday morning serial title, and that's what Star Wars is all about. So live with it. That's what all the Naboo designs kind of reference. It's all good. Jar Jar's he's great. Like, I've reassessed that performance completely in the wake of Ahmed Best's revelations about what it did to him. And, it didn't get the recognition it deserved for being so groundbreaking, both in terms of, technological expertise and melding the performer with the CGI. And with Jake Lloyd, he's a child actor. Give him a break.
Yeah. I look, I'm never going to be a Jar Jar fan. I mean, that's, Ahmed Best seems like a cool guy. I'm never really going to. It's just I just don't really get into that sort of humor. It's fine. It doesn't ruin the movie for me or anything like that.
I'll tell you what, though, I haven't watched it with my kid yet, but fart jokes, nailing it. That's all he laughs at now.
Yeah, and see, and that's probably, and if you were 5 when you saw the Phantom Menace, like, I get it. Like, I get, like, that. Yeah. That wouldn't have bothered you the same way. Like, I think I was 12, and yeah, even then I remember just, like, hating the fart joke and stuff like that. But whatever. Like, I still really enjoyed the movie overall the first few times I saw it. I mean, Jake Lloyd, I think he's fine. I don't have a huge problem with Jake Lloyd in this movie. Is it the finest performance ever given by a child actor? No. Like, he's not given Tatum O'Neal a run for her money. Is it perfectly?
He's not Sindel Tawani in Battle for Endor.
Exactly. Is it? People talk about, like, oh, it's so weird to see Darth Vader as, like, this sort of goofy little kid. It's like, yeah, that's the point. Like, he was this innocent little kid. He gets corrupted over the course of the 3 movies. I don't have a problem with that so much.
Even Hitler was a goofy little kid.
Exactly. If you could go back in time and kill, Anakin Skywalker as a baby, would you? Probably. I don't know.
You wouldn't have to. You just tell him to stay with his mum.
Yeah,
stay with mum.
Right. Yeah, exactly. The title never really. I don't know. I do remember thinking the title was bad when it was first announced.
Yeah,
but it was so long ago now, and I'm just so used to hearing it that when you pointed that out, I was like, oh yeah, people don't like there were people.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten that was the thing people didn't like about the movie, because it makes so much sense in the context of the trilogy as well, in terms of like Sidious is the Phantom Menace.
It was the first thing people hated about that movie, because it was the first thing people knew about that movie, you know, and instantly, the first thing you knew about it was the title is The Phantom Menace, and people immediately dunked on it because of that. It was a time to be alive.
I mean, and how great, are the designs in that movie? Like you mentioned that, it's really pushing like the Buck Rogers connections, and it is sort of saying, well, if Star Wars was like the 70s, then we're going back, like 30 years or so for the Phantom Menace, and we are in full, Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon, shiny, new, futuristic, innocent, naive kind of territory. So some of the designs in the Phantom Menace are some of my favorite designs in all of Star Wars, or in all of movies. I mean, I love the Naboo starfighter. I love Padme's ship. I love all the, a lot of the pod race designs. It's a movie you could just sit and look at, even if you don't really vibe with the story, and appreciate it on that level.
And it's got that classic Star Wars intercutting between various parts of the battle. At the end, the battle in the sky, the battle on the ground, the lightsaber duel. It just keeps that intensity up at 11 for the last probably half hour or more, 40 minutes probably, and it's great. And that the only lull you get in that really is the sequence with the energy doors, where Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon get separated and Maul gets separated, and they just and at the same time, everything's going wrong in space, everything's going wrong on the ground. And it's really well done, really well pieced together. I love the way that hangs together, that end battle sequence. It's one of the best.
I mean, and we've talked about this before, but the end of Black Panther is exactly the same as the end of Phantom Menace.
Yeah.
In terms of, you've got the one guy piloting the ship, doesn't really know what he's doing. You've got the ground battle in the lush green rolling hills. You've got the guys facing off with the energy barriers between them. And anyway, but it's very familiar. It's definitely something I've gotten, fonder and fonder of over the years. And if I had to just throw on a prequel and watch a prequel right now, it's the one I would pick without question. Phantom Menace. We could probably talk about Phantom Menace for hours, but let's keep it moving.
So far, we got our prequels in the same order. That's something. So, what was your number 3 on your list?
My number 3, THX 1138. Baz, why did you put THX 1138 at the bottom of your list?
The simple answer is, as soon as I thought about watching it again, I wanted to go to sleep, and that was just thinking about watching it. I watched it when I was possibly too young. First time round, and we've talked about this before. Like I think I watched 2001 when I was too young to appreciate what it was going for. I just watched it when I was too young, was bored out of my mind, couldn't sort of find a way in at all to this. Probably too young to even sort of appreciate what dystopia was. I mean, we never read 1984 in school, English class, like a lot of people do. So, we went Animal Farm instead. So, it's sort of, I didn't kind of dig what it was going for. Like, I remember watching something like Logan's Run and thinking Logan's Run was great. And essentially, it's similar in some ways, because it's got that, person escaping from futuristic dystopia kind of vibe about it, but handled in an altogether more sort of accessible way. But I just find THX 1138 soporific. Everything from the soundtrack to the sets to to the characters. I just find everything so dull and so soporific's the only word I can use. That when I immediately thought about trying to check it out again, I just thought, I haven't got that insomnia problem anymore, so I don't need to. I'm sleeping all right at the minute. So yeah, and I think I don't remember it that well, and I would be maybe eager to give it a go if I had a bit more time on my hands and sort of a bit more energy to try and make it through a couple of Monster Energy drinks or something. But yeah, look, who's got that kind of time at the minute? Just dull.
Yeah.
Yeah. I understand its importance in Lucas's career, but I think it's one of those examples where if you pad out an excellent idea for a short film into a longer film, it doesn't quite have everything that's there.
This has blown me away, I gotta say. I don't know. This is wild that we have been.
I knew this was going to be controversial.
Yeah, for so long, and I had no idea that you held such strong opinions against THX 1138.
I had no idea you hadn't seen Caravan of Courage.
Exactly. So we're still finding things out.
We're still learning. Yeah,
that's right. This is to be honest, this is the end of the list. I'm sort of excited to talk about. Where these are the films that, like, for me, this is why these are the movies. These are why I love George Lucas. For me, those first three films have so many like interesting little overlapping themes, and I think it's J.W. Rinsler who talks about how for him the real George Lucas trilogy is THX 1138, American Graffiti, and Star Wars. And the theme of that, it's a spiritual trilogy, if not obviously it's not. There's no connection between the plots, but the theme of that trilogy is growing up, coming of age, going out into the world. And I think that's dead on. And I think that's at the core of those three movies. And it's where I kind of struggle to like connect that with the prequels sometimes. I will say about THX 1138, before I get into the things I love about it, I hate with a passion that the director's cut is the only cut available to view. In many ways, I think that is as egregious as what's been done with Star Wars, probably even more egregious, because even though the film wasn't as impactful, like it's denying people the chance to see what this legendary filmmaker's first movie looked like. It's like cheating. You're going back to, he's gone back to his first movie and added all these CGI touches and all these, landscapes and close-ups that he couldn't have done back then. And it's like, now as you sit there and watch it and go, oh, isn't it amazing what he could do, in the early 70s? And you go, well, no, because, he didn't do it in the early 70s. Like this is, and the frustrating thing to me is that what he did do was better. Like if you could just see it without those CGI additions, I think you can appreciate the ingenuity of what he was able to do on a limited budget. And with those limitations that are crucial to what makes art in a lot of cases, and that he didn't have those when he came back to do the director's cut, and he could go back in and add whatever he wanted. So, anyway, just saying, not a fan of that. I think it's fine the director's cut exists. That's his prerogative. He can do what he wants. I just think there should also be, when you buy the director's cut, it should come with the original cut. Or at least you should have the option to be able to buy the original cut somehow, or watch the original cut through some legal manner. I think it's ridiculous that you can't. And it, like, just from a film history perspective, it's criminal that they've done that.
This is the man who's a holiday special denier. He's buried his own work so deep that. I think that's what you can come to expect from George these days, isn't it?
So yeah, I get very worked up over that. But in terms of the film itself, it's a really interesting first feature. I think this is the closest he ever got to, in any of his feature films at least, to capturing the abstract feel of 2187, which was this, we've talked about on the show before, was this audio visual collage by Arthur Lipset that made George Lucas fall in love with filmmaking in the first place. And the way he uses that style here is to sort of create this totally immersive experience where you're in the future, you're in the world of THX. There's not always necessarily anything like, it's not always clear like where the plot's going. So I grant you that. Like, it's definitely not the most exciting George Lucas movie, that's for sure. But I mean, I think the way that he is able to sort of, completely immerse people in this world is really interesting, because it goes to probably his core strength, I think, as a filmmaker, which is like, you go back to before he got into filmmaking and he was into anthropology. And I think in those first 3 films, that interest in anthropology, or that kind of like that way of looking at the world, is really on display in those first 3 movies. With, the level of world building and the way that he just kind of throws you into these worlds. It doesn't really, it doesn't explain what's going on, and just leaves you to kind of figure it out. It's his only real sci-fi film. So Star Wars, I don't think, I'm sure you don't either. The Star Wars films aren't sci-fi films. It's, it's space fantasy, space opera, etc. But, George says he has this quote, THX was a parable about the way people were living in 1970. It wasn't about the future. Cool. You can say that about all good sci-fi. That's the whole point of most sci-fi. And as a result, there's a level of like overt social commentary in this movie that Lucas would never go for again. That I think is really interesting. Again, it's just, for a first feature, it's so interesting how many of like the sort of core themes and major interests that he keeps coming back to are already present and like fully formed in this movie. So THX is all about a society that's cut itself off from the organic world. And that's obviously a core theme of Star Wars, man versus machine, man's relationship with machines, and the kind of urge to reconnect with the natural world in some way. And that's, at the end of this film, spoiler alert, when THX, emerges from the underground, from the BART system in San Francisco and comes out into the sunlight. I mean, that one moment kind of encapsulates what all of George Lucas's movies are about, or at least what those early movies were about. I love, again, the little digs at bureaucracy, which is something that, that's a bugbear that Lucas would come back to, Target, he would come back to again and again and again over the years. And that's something that definitely connects this with the prequels is, the idea that the bad guys, or the bad guy, the whatever you want to call it, the empire, the ruling society, gives up on chasing THX because it's getting too expensive. That they're monitoring the cost of this operation, and that, the pencil pushers can't justify chasing him any further, so he gets away, is amazing. And this is all stuff that it feels deeply personal. It feels deeply connected to his upbringing as, the son of like a stationery salesman or whatever his dad was in Modesto, who wanted to, go and do something else. The score is great. And a very atypical score by Lalo Schifrin as well, like very far from the world of, Mission Impossible and that kind of like funky, Enter the Dragon, like kind of funky 70s sort of stuff. Very like ominous and great, builds this great sense of foreboding. It's like Blade Runner, 12 years, 13 years before Blade Runner. So yeah, I love this movie. It's not my favorite. I mean, obviously I put it number 3 on the list, so it's not my favorite George Lucas movie. But I definitely, if you haven't watched it in a while, I would definitely recommend going back and rewatching it, especially because I feel like after some of the sort of deep dives and stuff we've done on the pod, I think there's probably parts of it that you'd like more.
Yeah.
And like,
I fully expect that to happen. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that is,
and I will. I promise you. You've convinced me. I promise you, I will go back and watch it.
And Robert Duvall's great in it. Like the cast is great. Donald Pleasance is great. Everybody's great.
Yeah, it's you're right. I think you used the word art there, and it is probably the most artful, the most art house, the most like art of George Lucas's movies.
I mean, it's definitely the most like
the
challenging,
least populist.
the least populist, exactly.
Yeah,
it's the one that feels the closest.
Yeah, and I think that's I know, and that might be what turns me off it as well. Like, don't like art.
I mean, it is funny. Like, even though there's so many themes that connect up, it is funny that like this is a film that was made by a guy who, less than a decade later would turn around and make the most populist form of entertainment of all time. That is odd. I mean, I think Walter Murch is a huge part of this movie as well. Like the sort of soundscapes that he creates are a huge part of what immerses you in the world of THX, especially, the movie as it was before the director's cut, and he didn't have the budget to necessarily put all of this world on screen. Walter Murch did so much of that. Anyway,
George always really was savvy with merch, wasn't he? Always.
Yes, that's right. There's surprisingly little THX merch, or for that matter, surprisingly little Walter Murch merch. I would absolutely buy a Walter Murch action figure or something.
But every time, as you said, every time you go on San Francisco's BART system, you'll
live in the THX dream. Yeah, exactly. All right, Baz, what is your? I think I can guess where we're going from here on out, but you threw me a curveball with THX, so I can't say for sure. What's your number 2?
American Graffiti.
Hey.
Or as they call it in America, graffiti. Yeah. And your number 2?
Also American Graffiti.
Yes, I knew it.
Yeah, and this to me, the connections between this and THX, the connection is the anthropology again. This is anthropology on film. This is one of the great things about THX and American Graffiti, is just the level of immersive detail I just talked about, the sort of soundscapes that Walter Murch was able to create for THX, and he did the same thing for American Graffiti. The cool thing that he did with American Graffiti, everybody kind of knows, like, this was one of the first movies to use like pop music on the soundtrack to the extent that it did. The job of music supervisor did not exist before American Graffiti.
Or was it Wolfman Jack?
Oh, Wolfman Jack, yeah.
Be the first music supervisor.
Yeah, that's true. Walter Murch did this cool thing with this movie where he would play the records through speakers in the spaces that the characters in the film were going to occupy, so that he could switch between, playing the original records on the soundtrack and playing like his re-recorded versions of the record that sounded like what the characters were hearing in those spaces, depending on the kind of feeling that he was going for, which probably all sounds very obvious now, but when he did it then, that was really innovative. And that added to, again, I've used the word 100 times now, but it added to that feeling of immersion that George Lucas created.
I think that George stated that he wanted the music to just keep going the whole time, just soundtrack everything, and only stop when the cars stop,
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons that people like us, I think one of the reasons that geeks latch on to Star Wars so hard is because George appreciates the value of that sort of cultural detritus, that stuff that seems meaningless, those kind of incidental images and sounds and details that seem kind of worthless in the moment, but it's those things that nostalgia is made of. It's those things that bring those environments and those moments to life. And American Graffiti is full of it. He's very, American Graffiti is such a keenly observed movie. It's a guy remembering in stark detail, his life as a teenager, as this teenage revhead in Modesto, and then putting that on screen. And, I'm not saying all the experiences were the same or the stories are the same, but the feelings were the same. And George is able to recreate those feelings so perfectly. And I think it's that same thing that he brings to Star Wars. It's that level of detail. It's that level of, this all feels real. Even the tiny details, they're important. And I think Lucas has a great eye for stuff like that.
He does, yeah. As an anthropologist, he's turning the lens on himself here. He's studying, the American teenager in car culture, and with the the musical soundtrack, and it's everything. It's all about how he grew up.
Yeah,
and I saw this after Star Wars. Obviously, I saw Star Wars first, and then explored this later on. And by that point, I think I had heard the NPR radio dramas, which go into more detail about Luke's life on Tatooine.
Mm-hmm.
And when I saw American Graffiti, I was like, this is Luke's life on Tatooine. This is Luke and Deke and Wendy and Biggs and Fixer and Cammy all hanging out in town, just doing laps of the strip in their hot rods and, talking about maybe, I'm going to go away to the academy this year. And, it's the last night before we say goodbye. That's the experience that we would have got had Star Wars had like an hour-long prologue.
Yeah. Yeah, 1,000,000%. Absolutely. Was it Francis Ford Coppola said like the tragedy of George Lucas's career, or he might not have used the word tragedy, but the thing about George Lucas's career is that Star Wars happened and it was the biggest movie in the world, and his career then became Star Wars essentially, and other things on the scale of Star Wars, your Indiana Joneses, etc. And obviously neither of us would trade Star Wars for anything, but it would have been great in a way to see what he did if Star Wars wasn't as big of a hit or didn't sort of take as much out of him, or whatever led him to have that huge gap in directing, and to see like what other worlds he could have created. Because this is this is a real world, sure, but he creates this world in such exacting detail. Period movies that are not set that far in the past, I feel like often don't get the credit they deserve for being able to recreate that period. If you look at the Oscar contenders, it's so often like, wow, they recreated like Victorian England or whatever. And it's like, okay, but like, it's just as impressive to be able to recreate. I thought it was really cool that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood won like the Production Design Award last year.
Yeah,
that to me is incredible. And this is that same kind of thing, and it's a great looking movie. A lot of that's down to Haskell Wexler, who, George knew from his old hot rodding days, who he brought on board as a sort of consultant with the cinematography. And, just the cars look so great, like the lights reflecting off them, like the street lights, like it's all.
Yeah. And it's weird that, I grew up in the UK, you grew up in Australia, but we spawned to this cultural, moment when it's American 50s stuff. And, you would have probably visited an American style diner when you were a kid.
Oh, I love that stuff. Did. But because of this movie, most likely.
Possibly, yeah. But, all that stuff just trickles down to the rest of Western civilization. And we like, your Coca-Cola bottles and your jukeboxes, and it's just all that stuff is as iconic to us as it would have been to Americans back then. It's just evergreen. Something about it's evergreen, but it's all the time as well. And that's I got stupidly emotional the other day watching Cars.
Like the Pixar movie?
The Pixar movie. And I guess there's a lot of the same stuff in that. It's like the nostalgia for
all the Route 66 stuff.
Yeah, Route 66, a road culture that's dying, that's kind of being marginalized and pushed out by modernization. And, it's the feeling that you can never go back again. It's really interesting.
Yeah, 100%. And this is, you touched on like those 50s diners, etc. I mean, this is one of the most influential. We think of Star Wars as one of the most influential films of all time. This is just as influential in the culture, I feel like, in its own way. I mean, the idea of the kind of 4 interlocking narratives that, it's not always obvious how they cross over, but they do. I mean, that wasn't really being done. I'm not saying it had never been done before, but I don't think it was very common when American Graffiti came out. And here it was appearing in what at the time was became one of the highest grossing films of all time. We talked about obviously the influence of the soundtrack, the revival of that sort of late 50s, early 60s culture, which, is so funny that it's 11 years ago. Like for us, that's 2010. I don't feel particularly nostalgic for 2010, but it's just, culture moves at a different speed, I guess.
That's right. Yeah. The other thing about this that's a parallel to Star Wars and Tatooine is that there's a war in a faraway place looming over everything here, and it's kind of affecting the futures of some of these characters too. So that's kind of an interesting observation too, because that the Vietnam War was a big touchstone for George in making Star Wars, in terms of the man versus machine or technology versus nature kind of themes that he had going on. Yeah.
And the movie's so funny too, right? Like
it is, yeah.
Like a lot of people say, well, George can't do comedy. George isn't funny. I mean, anyone who says that just needs to watch this movie. I grant you a lot of the stuff in the prequels, a lot of that comedy does not work. It's one of my main problems with those movies. But this movie is hilarious. Now, a lot of that is due to, the Hikes who wrote the movie with George. But again, he's the director. Like, comedy can die on the vine in the hands of a director who doesn't get comedy. And George seemed to have like a great sort of sense of comic timing in this movie. I mean, the Toad stuff is, that's a McLovin 30 years before McLovin. The scene where Toad's trying to buy alcohol, it's hilarious, and we've all been that kid. Like, it feels so dead on and so well observed again. And you talked about this, the fact that it's this war is hanging over all of them. This kind of like the end of an era is hanging over all of them. I mean, there's, we know George loves like his Japanese culture. There's this Japanese saying, mono no aware, which is like, it's like the awareness of the impermanence of the moment when you're in the moment. This is like mono no aware, the movie. Like, everything about this movie is like capturing that feeling of like, this is, the last night of something. This is all going away. The end credits song, like All Summer Long by the Beach Boys. I mean, one of the all-time great needle drops in an end credits. I mean, it's the only one. I think it's funny. Like, George must have been so convinced that it was the right song for this film, because it's the only one that doesn't quite fit the era. Like, it's not the right, the song didn't exist at the time, but it's just so perfectly captures that feeling of like impermanence of things. So yeah, it's a great movie. If he hadn't directed Star Wars, if this was his legacy, it's a great legacy.
Yeah, for sure. Well, there's only one movie left on the list, and we've blown the reveal of our choice for number one, I think. Unless one of us has gone truly rogue and found a movie that George directed that the other didn't know about. But I didn't. Did you? No, it's my number one is Electric Labyrinth. My
number one is Radioland Murders. Howard the Duck. No, it is. It has to be, obviously. It's
Star Wars Episode 4. Yeah. What can you say? It's the movie that changed my life. So, yeah.
Would this be? No, I don't think, if I'm remembering correctly, this would not be number one on your list of favorite Star Wars films.
It comes and goes. I think at the minute it might be.
Okay.
But the only ones that would occasionally rise to do battle with it would be Empire Strikes Back and possibly The Last Jedi. With maybe Force Awakens a slight tier below that, but it would never. I don't think it would ever step up to replace A New Hope. I don't think it would ever get above A New Hope. Yeah. But Empire and Last Jedi might. Yeah. Occasionally, depending on how I'm feeling. But I think at the moment, I'm really digging on the original.
Yeah. I'm with you. It's far and away my favorite Star Wars film, and my favorite George Lucas film. The other Star Wars films are great. Obviously, like that's we've talked enough about that over the years. But they are expansion packs. They're the DLC, and the original film that's the explosion of creativity that made all the rest of it possible. It's the huge, it's the big leap forward.
Yeah, it sets the tone for everything. That comes after it.
Yeah, exactly. There's like this barnstorming spirit to Star Wars that to A New Hope that the other Star Wars movies don't have. It feels so fresh. I mean, and there's probably a lot of arguments you can make that Empire is a better film on some levels, but for me, it's the energy of Star Wars separates it from anything else. The thing about Star Wars that I love in relation to George's life and George's career, you were just talking about American Graffiti feels like the first hour of what Star Wars would have been if we'd seen Luke on Tatooine, etc. Star Wars, much more so than any of the other Star Wars films, feels like a movie that the kids in American Graffiti would love. Like a movie that the kids in American Graffiti would go and watch. And that's something that I think kind of gets forgotten when we do these sort of deep dives into, Star Wars lore and Jedi lore and Sith history and whatever. It's like that stuff's all interesting and that stuff's all fun. But like ultimately this is a movie about like things moving fast and things getting blown up and kids dreaming of better lives. And, like that's Star Wars. Like that's A New Hope more than it describes any of the other movies. It doesn't get as caught up on all of those. I remember when I was a kid, you were saying before, like being able to connect with that experience of American Graffiti, even though neither of us had anything close to like an American Graffiti sort of upbringing. I grew up in Ipswich, which is pretty much the Modesto of southeast Queensland, in a lot of ways, or the Tatooine, the Mos Eisley of southeast Queensland. And I remember. Oh,
okay, what's Bow Desert then?
Okay, yeah, fair call.
Mos Espa.
Fair call. And I remember once when I was a kid, we went and saw. I don't know. It's so funny because it's not something I would choose to do now, probably. But we went and saw we went to like a monster truck rally. And the reason we went is because, like, I insisted because they were playing Star Wars on a big, like, outdoor, drive-in screen as part of the monster truck rally. Like, so it was like you've got Star Wars on the screen, like the Death Star trench run with like monster trucks and fireworks and whatever. And it's like it's funny looking back at it because that's the only Star Wars movie that would work with. Do you know what I mean? Like it's the only Star Wars movie that feels like it's a little rough and ready and it's a little, it's not as polished as the others that came later. And it is more about, because a young George directed it, and it is about, kinetic energy, and it is about things going fast and blowing things up. And it's, I mean, that right there is the difference between Star Wars and Star Trek. You can never put Star Trek on the big screen at a monster truck rally, There
are very few things you could, maybe Fast and Furious films or
exactly.
Smokey and the Bandit.
And you might say that's a really weird metric by which to judge a movie. What is wrong with you? And I would say, yes, very good point. But what I'm saying is it's those American Graffiti kids in space.
Yeah.
And it's George's life as a teenager, as a young adult, transported into space and put on screen. So it's deeply personal.
That's it. That's who he wrote it for. He wrote it for himself and kids like him, didn't he? So yeah, he wrote it for those American Graffiti kids. Yep. And by the way, that monster truck rally showing Star Wars, do they do that now? Because that would be the perfect night out for me and Gully.
I have no idea, but I'll
monster trucks for him, Star Wars for me, something for the dads. And yeah,
I will endeavor to find out.
Can some promoter just do that? That would be amazing.
See, I don't even know if they had they probably didn't legally have the rights to be showing it, but
probably no. It was the Wild West back then. Quite literally. But speaking of, like, Star Wars has so many influences that it probably has no right to work. When you think about all the things that George Lucas threw at that screen, from samurai movies to westerns to fairy tales, princesses, cowboys, old wizards, these ultra technological bad guys. Yeah, all that amazing stuff. It probably, if it didn't have that framework of the Joseph Campbell hero's journey to it, it probably it would fall flat. But as it is, it's the most amazing space fantasy of all time. Yeah, I think it says that on one of the posters. It's incredible.
Yeah, and those influences again. I mean, you're right, and that to me that's also that's part of what separates it from the other Star Wars movies, because Star Wars is the one that was made by the guy who was obsessed with that stuff.
Yeah, it's
the one. George was the guy who was bringing, that samurai influence into it and that Western influence into it. And the other movies are all great, but it's just impossible to imagine any of them. It's impossible to imagine anyone creating something like Star Wars without Star Wars existing.
Yeah, it was the perfect storm. If George hadn't been interested in filmmaking, anthropology, things that go fast, American car culture, none of this would have happened. It would have, it was just that he's the only person that could have made that film at that time, and I'm glad he did.
And again, we talked before about man versus machine, the organic, the inorganic, the natural, technological, etc. That's all over this movie. That's the Force. That's that's Luke learning to trust in the Force and trust his senses and so on and so forth. And I mean, yeah, it's the statement that George was building up to his whole life until he got to Star Wars. It's, I know this is sort of a crude and basic way to put it, but it really is THX plus American Graffiti equals Star Wars. Like it's the, the sci-fi technological elements of THX, the personal, the love of, speed and vehicles and the, and the humor of American Graffiti. And it creates, and that sense in both movies of like wanting to do something more. And it all comes together in Star Wars. And maybe that's why he didn't direct anything else for, 20 years, because he said everything he wanted to say in Star Wars. It's the perfect statement of what George Lucas was all about.
So that's our Lucas list. How did we do at predicting each other's?
I did so badly. Hang on, let me find my list here. Look, to quote that meme going around Twitter at the moment, I did not understand the assignment. I got what did I get here? I got, what was your actual list? Can you run it down for me again?
So number 6, THX. Number 5, Attack of the Clones. Number 4, Revenge of the Sith. Number 3, The Phantom Menace. Number 2, American Graffiti. Number 1, A New Hope.
Okay. Number 6. So this is what I guessed for you. Number 6, Attack of the Clones. So that's wrong. Number 5, Phantom Menace. That's wrong. Number 4, Revenge of the Sith, also wrong. Number 3, Graffiti, wrong. Number 2, THX, incorrect. Very incorrect. And number 1, Star Wars. So 1 out of 6.
Oh, hang on. No. 4 was Revenge of the Sith. You got that right too.
Oh, sick.
Yep. So you got 2.
Nice. Oh, yeah, only because I had Phantom and Revenge of the Sith around the way, but it worked out because, yeah. So 2 out of 6. I'll take that. My list was number 6, Attack of the Clones. Number 5, Revenge of the Sith. Number 4, The Phantom Menace. Number 3, THX 1138. Number 2, American Graffiti. And number 1, Star Wars.
I got 3 of yours.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, I got your bottom 1 and your top 2. The rest in the middle is just fiddling around. I put THX 1 lower than you had it. Revenge of the Sith higher. 2 higher. And then at number 5, I had Phantom Menace for you. Yeah. I thought you were going to be down on Phantom Menace. So yeah, that was that's not bad. It's not bad.
Yeah, there you go. Well, Baz, a happy May 4th to you and yours, and to everybody listening to this. Go forth and enjoy the Bad Batch and everything else that the folks at Lucasfilm deigned to release today.
I wonder if there'll be any surprises.
Don't know. You guys in the future know by now. It's exciting.
Yeah, I'm hoping that there'll be some surprises in the Star Wars action figure collecting market.
Could be. We shall soon see. Let us know your Lucas lists at. Hit us up on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're at Force Material at all those places. You can also drop us a line at forcematerial@gmail.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, you can drop us a sweet 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. I'm Rowan Williams.
I'm Baz McAllister.
And you've just taken your first step into a larger world.